This is session 615, a session on NEH funding and grant programs. My name is Jesse Johnston, and I'm a program officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities in the Division of Preservation and Access, and so I'll be moderating and also presenting this afternoon. We have three presenters today. I'm going to be speaking about giving you an overview of NEH and also our preservation and access programs. I'm joined by my colleague Julia Nguyen, who is a program officer in the Division of Education Programs at the NEH, and she'll be talking about education programs offered by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And our third presenter this afternoon is Siobhan Senier, an associate professor of English at the University of New Hampshire, where she teaches in Native American literature, women's studies, and sustainability. She's the editor of Dawnland Voices, an anthology of writing from Indigenous New England, and of indigenousnewengland.com, which is what she'll be speaking on. And she'll be offering a perspective from someone who has applied to the NEH and worked with NEH programs. So together, we hope that these give you a good idea of NEH's current programs and also some of the possibilities that if you have projects in mind, you might be able to fit them into current programs at the NEH. And also to give you a perspective on what it's like to be an applicant to the NEH and how the process works. So to start things off, and I'll try to integrate just a couple of general tips about applying for federal grants, of course, but I'll be speaking mostly about the National Endowment for the Humanities specific grant programs and preservation, which I think are of highest interest to people working in tribal archives, libraries, and museums. However, it's always a good idea to start with a general overview of what particular agencies' grant programs are aiming to do. And so with the National Endowment for the Humanities, our mandate is to support excellence in the humanities and to bring humanities experiences to people where they're at in their communities. We are charged with supporting a variety of humanities disciplines. History is one of the biggest. I've just put together a sort of word cloud here of the various disciplines that we're legislated to serve, and you can see history is among the largest, but we also offer programs to support research, education, and preservation of primary source materials in languages and linguistics, literature, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion and ethics, and the history, criticism, and theory of the arts. So it's quite a broad range of disciplines that we serve. And it's also always good to keep in mind that we are charged with sort of serving these disciplines, and we're not necessarily charged with, say, supporting libraries specifically. We see libraries as a very important institution for educational and research uses, but that's not necessarily at the very center of that mission. I would also stress for tribal organizations, colleges, and cultural centers that they're eligible to apply for any of our grant programs since they're open. The organizational programs are open to nonprofits and state and local government level organizations. But we do have a number of programs that are either geared specifically for research or development of humanities initiatives at tribal colleges and universities, or are particularly well suited for the care of cultural heritage collections at tribal libraries, archives, and museums. And I'll be speaking about a couple of those, as will Julia. NEH is organized in a sort of functional way, and we have 7 different offices and divisions that support a variety of different programs. And we'll be talking about the more programmatic ones, which on this circle are the ones at the top, going down to the right. Education, public programs, research, and preservation and access. So as you can see from the names of those divisions, they support different functions that come together to support the humanities. So essentially by allocating funds through these different divisions, the endowment funds projects to strengthen teaching and learning in the humanities in schools and colleges, to provide opportunities for lifelong learning through public programs, to facilitate research and original scholarship through research programs and funding, and to preserve and provide access to cultural resources. And that would be preservation and access. I'll be talking specifically about the division of preservation and access, and our mandate is really to, if you think about sort of the endowment as a pyramid, you might think of us as sort of raw materials or something at the base, basically to preserve and make more available primary source resources for further educational endeavors, for documentaries or radio programs, or for in-depth research. Our aim is to increase access and intellectual control of collections by cataloging, arranging, and describing them, to plan and assess collections for care needs, to improve collections environments, in some cases to provide conservation treatment, to digitize collections, develop databases, and to promote research that can better carry out these sorts of functions. I'm going to talk about 3 programs that we currently have going, and so the Division of Preservation and Access currently has 8 different programs. Some are of higher interest than others, and I'm going to just focus on the ones that I think would be of highest interest for ATALM organizations. One of them is called the Preservation Assistance Grants for Smaller Institutions, or PAG. Preservation assistance grants are aiming to help smaller and mid-sized organizations to basically build institutional capacity to better care for physical collections that may be in your stewardship. It allows you to do a number of different things, essentially that might be everything from bringing in an outside consultant who adds expertise that you don't have at your local institution on staff, to providing education for local staff, either through workshops or sending people to specialized workshops in other places. These grants are up to $6,000, and they don't involve any cost share. They're a relatively short application compared to most other NEH applications. And currently, they're on an annual cycle, and applications are due in May. So the next deadline for PAG grants will be in May of 2016. PAG recipients include a number of tribal organizations, including libraries, archives, and museums. For example, you see different graphics that represent various organizations who have recently received funds through this program. They include the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, who received a grant to help to document basketry traditions. And they were able to conduct a preservation assessments of their archival holdings that pertained to the art of black ash basketry making, and also were able to hold a workshop for staff at their archives to learn more about preserving archival materials. And we hope that that contributes to the continuation of knowledge about this particular basket making tradition. Other sorts of activities can also be supported by PAG grants, including developing storage plans and organizing collections, which might include new storage furniture for collections or new housing materials like acid-free folders or other sorts of things like that. These are just, we get a lot of pictures like this in our grant reports where we see sort of the state of things before receiving funds and being able to plan for storage, and afterward when things are hopefully in a much better situation and will be preserved in a better way for a longer time. So you see everything nicely lined up and put into boxes there after. This grant program can also support the purchase of environmental monitoring equipment or other rehousing supplies. Many of the grantees in this program probably don't really use hydrothermographs and things like that, but have digital environmental monitors now to make sure that collections are being, that you at least have information about the current environment that collections are being held in. It can also support the development of specialized plans to improve environmental conditions based on, say, environmental monitoring data that you're gathering through those sorts of environmental monitoring equipment that you can purchase, or improved security or fire protection plans. It can also support disaster planning and emergency response. This graphic just indicates one of the awards to the Southern Ute Cultural Center and Museum, which was able to undertake a disaster planning activity with the support of a PAG grant. And finally, the PAG program can also enable staff at an institution to attend specialized workshops, whether that be in developing greater expertise in handling and caring for archival materials, specific types of objects that you may have in your collections, or even to digital preservation. And so typically these are not meant to support pursuing a specialized certificate or master's degree, but just a very specialized workshop, and it could be one or more staff at an institution that would be able to attend. The second program I'm going to talk about is called Documenting Endangered Languages, or DEL. This program is a partnership between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Science Foundation. It was launched a little bit over 10 years ago in the hopes of ameliorating the situation that we're currently in, where linguists expect that within the next century, we think that approximately half of the world's languages may no longer be spoken or be forgotten or confronted with dwindling speaker communities. This is a situation I think that many Native communities are familiar with. And in order to help this situation, the NSF and the NEH developed this program in order to improve the documentation and preservation of language information so that hopefully that can in the future be used for revitalization activities. And there's a number of current strategies that are supported, but this grant program specifically supports from the NEH, the documentation level of linguistic work. So if you're interested in this grant program in your community, you need to be working with a linguist who would be able to work with the community and develop a documentation plan. And NSF is currently trying to work more with supporting revitalization programs. I'm just going to skip ahead to the examples of projects that have been supported through the DEL program recently. Just this past year, both the NSF and the NEH were able to make an award to the University of California at Berkeley. And Berkeley has a collection of about 3,000 wax cylinders that were recorded by early anthropologists, including people like Franz Boas and other people who were interested in recording native languages. California, as many of you may know, was one of the places of greatest native linguistic diversity. And so this is a particularly important collection in that it has many documentation of many languages that are no longer spoken, including ritual speech and also songs and other cultural information. Many of these are still on wax cylinders, and the University of California proposed to digitally transfer these materials from the wax cylinders using a contactless audio preservation technology called IRENE, which will develop detailed images of the surface of each of those cylinders, and that will be able to be rendered into a sound signal. Those materials will be used to hopefully be available through, at least as cultural protocols permit, through the California Language Archive, which is another project that was supported through NEH funds. And this is an online web-accessible resource that allows anyone who's willing to register, it's a free registration, to look at materials from these collections. So this includes not only audio, which the current grant is supporting, but also field documentation, field notebooks, some photographs, and also is searchable through a GIS map interface. So those are the sorts of projects that can be supported through the Documenting Endangered Languages program. The final program that I'll talk about is the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections program. This is a program that it offers larger awards than the PAG program. They may be from $40,000 for planning grants up to $300,000. Application cycles are also annual in this program, and applications are due in December. The program's aim is to support preventive conservation and preservation, particularly with an attention to environmentally sustainable activities, whether that be developing larger temperature and relative humidity ranges that are okay to keep collections in rather than fixed set points, or experimenting with various shutdown mechanisms, say not keeping environmental equipment running all the time, shutdowns at night, for example. One example of a program that was supported through this SCHC grant initiative was to the Abbey Museum in Maine. And they were able to upgrade climate control and lighting systems in the museum there, which has a large collection of material that relates to the tribes in central Maine, collectively known as the Wabanaki. And that actually is an example of a relatively small institution, a museum in this case in Maine, able to receive a large amount of funding from NEH. So although these grants do often go to very large museums, local level organizations are able to apply and are often receiving funds as well. And I will just speak briefly about one final program that Preservation and Access offers, which is the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources. This, I forgot to update the date, but it would be July of 2016, actually. This program is a sort of central program and really speaks to the aims of the division in terms of improving intellectual control of collections and also creating better access to collections. So this program could support activities like cataloging. It could support activities like digitizing collections, and also the creation of better ways to access materials, like the creation of dictionaries, say in the case of languages, or other encyclopedias or reference resources. Just a quick example of one project that was supported through this is the Plateau People's Web Portal, which was involved in the creation of Mukutu, which is an open source platform that has been presented here and many of you may know about. And so that's just an example. If you're interested in doing any of those sorts of activities and would like to talk with me, I'd be happy to do so. Okay, I have a couple of notes about how to apply and things like that, but we want to go first through all of the NEH programs, and then we can get to that later. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia, who's going to speak about programs in the Division of Education.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we offer in the Division of Education programs. Our mission is to support humanities education. So that has to be the primary focus of anything that we would fund through our division. But as you'll see, there are ways that our mission can very easily coincide with the mission of libraries, archives, and museums. I'm going to focus especially on the Humanities Initiatives at Tribal Colleges and Universities program. This is a program that a deadline that is held yearly. So we just had the last deadline in June. The next one will be June of next year. They're relatively modest awards, up to $100,000, and they're designed to improve humanities education at tribal colleges and universities. For this particular program, eligibility is a bit narrower than most of our other programs. For most of our programs, if you are a nonprofit or state or local government entity, you're eligible. For this particular program, the applicant of record must be a tribal college. But this is a program where we especially encourage partnerships with cultural organizations to help enrich the project and increase the likelihood of success. So I'm going to talk about a few of the programs that we've funded in the Humanities Initiatives, just to give you an idea of some of the range of things. It's a very flexible program. Again, the aim is to improve humanities education at tribal colleges, and that's about as specific as we get, because we really want the applicants to tell us what their needs are. They're going to be different at every institution, and tell us what they want to do to meet those needs. So this is one example. This is a very recent project. We funded it in our previous deadline, so they've just started their project. It is to create an online interactive Inupiaq language database. Really an interesting and exciting program. The work is being done here at the Tazi Consortium Library. This is in Barrow, Alaska, way at the very, very top. A really exciting program. And it's creating this language preservation and revitalization resource that is something that faculty members at the tribal college can then use in their language and culture classrooms. But it's also something that can be used by others as well. So just because the primary aim is for something that's going to result in an improved education at the college doesn't mean it can't have other applications as well. And I think this is something that is especially true at tribal colleges, where there's often an important link between the college and the larger community. Another example, Salish Kootenai College used a Humanities Initiative grant to develop a tribal historic preservation program. So these are just a few of the images from the project as the faculty members were working on developing the courses for the program and then getting students involved in this new program. And then a third example from the Institute of American Indian Arts, where faculty members used the grant money to develop digital resources and then also to develop new courses for their museum studies program. So this is just a small sampling of some of the things that we've funded in this program. A lot of the tribal college grants are for language preservation and revitalization efforts. This is something that is frequently seen as a critical need. And I think libraries, archives, and museums often have a really crucial role to play in that process. So frequently that kind of collaboration is often very useful. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly, and I don't have a slide for it, I'm afraid, but our summer programs. So we run summer professional development programs in the summer. They're primarily geared towards college and university faculty members or K-12 teachers. This is a program that is open to any nonprofit, educational entity, state and local government. It is something that may not be the core mission for those of you at libraries, archives, and museums, but if, for example, working with K-12 teachers is something that you're interested in doing, it can be a really great way to bring in teachers from all over the country. And I will say that when we talk to the teachers who take part in our summer programs, history, cultures, literatures of Native peoples is something that a lot of them are really interested in. They often feel that they're unequipped to teach that in the classroom. They don't really have the knowledge that they want to have. And so it's frequently something that teachers say, we really want to learn more about this. Can you offer summer programs on this? So if working with K-12 teachers is something that could fit with your core mission or something that your institution is interested in doing, they're often a really great way to get involved with that audience. As I said, there are summer programs. The grants are a little bit larger. They range usually from about $100,000 up to $200,000. And they're designed to bring in school teachers from all over the country. So it's a great way to get to know what folks are teaching in other parts of the country and to really give them knowledge that, as I said, in a lot of cases, they feel they just really don't have, and it's something that they can then take back to their classrooms and impart to their students. So, yes? The deadline for that is the end of February. So this coming year, February of 2016, the deadline will be for projects that take place in summer 2017. So there's about a year and a half between the application and actually running the program. The programs range from 1 week up to 5 weeks, so you can sort of choose the time frame that fits best for the topic that you want to explore.
Who recruits the teachers? Would that be?
It's the project director. So the person who gets the grant is the person who recruits the teachers. We also do some sort of general publicity, but the teachers actually apply directly to you, and then you pick the people that you feel would be the best participants for your program. Any other questions? All right, well, I will turn it over to Siobhan, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Julia. Now, Siobhan Senier is going to talk about IndigenousNewEngland.com, which is a project that received funding from NEH starting just last year in 2014. So this, I think, is brand new information.
This is also my my first NEH grant and my first federal grant of any time. So if you're a first-time applicant, I'm happy to hold hands with anybody who wants to be a first-time applicant. And this grant is for about $39,000 plus. It came through the Office of Preservation and Access. They have a program called the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources program that Jesse mentioned, but they have these subcategory in there called the Foundations Grant. So this was a Foundations grant, and I will say that it took me a little while to figure out which division and which office to approach at NEH. I kind of went through a couple of other divisions and offices and didn't come up with much, but finally hit it right with this particular office. And I also started this grant 6 months out from the deadline. That was a trick that I learned from science buddies who apply to NSF a lot. So they take a long time to write. You know, if somebody's telling you that a grant is due October 1st, don't be tempted to try to put this together. So this project actually started with a print anthology that was not part of the grant. And the print anthology was 10 years in the making. It's called Donlean Voices. It is an anthology of Indigenous writing from New England. And it's a collection of writing by Native American people from what we now call New England. It covers 10 tribal nations from the Micmac in Maine and the Maritimes all the way down to the Schaghticoke of Western Connecticut, and it covers texts from very early 17th century petitions and petroglyphs all the way up to hip-hop poetry. So it's a tome. It's almost 700 pages long, and it had each tribal nation had a community editor who worked with me to help solicit new writings, find historic writings, curate those writings, decide what should be in the book and what should not be in the book, how they should be annotated. So the book represents just a few of the writers, historic and current, who are important to these communities. So I say just a few because even though it's 700 pages long, there was a lot more writing that these tribal community editors found and that they wanted to put in the book, but we eventually, you know, with a print book, you eventually have to put a lid on it or it will get too expensive. So When I got to work with these tribal historians, and one of them was Donald Soktoma, who got one of the awards yesterday at lunch, the first guy to get the award, Passamaquoddy. He was the Passamaquoddy tribal editor. And, when I got to work with people like Donald, as someone who was trained as a literary historian, to sort of go to archives and libraries, it was incredibly humbling to realize that tribal communities have their own ways of storing and remembering and preserving and archiving this literature that I had really not been trained to discover. So I really needed to work with tribal people. So we started, given that it was 700 pages long, we started to think about how we could make it a living document, right? How it could continually expand to include new writings that were either being produced at the moment or being found in the archives, or maybe even a platform for community comment on this literature. So Web 2.0 is the natural place to go for that kind of thing. And I started this site before I applied for the grant, sort of totally ad hoc and totally on the cheap. I was following a principle that you often hear in digital humanities circles. If any of you follow digital humanities, they talk about more hack, less yak, right? So instead of standing around theorizing everything and writing about it, just start building it. So I just started building it and playing with it so that I would have something to show to tribal partners. They could tell me they didn't like it or not. And I also started building it with students, which is something I won't talk about so much today because it's not part of the grant at hand, but I'm happy to talk about it to anybody who wants to know offline how that went. But the first exhibit that we did on this website was actually a collaboration with the Mount Kearsarge Indian Museum in New Hampshire, which has a combination of native and non-native staff. And they had designed this fantastic exhibit of traveling exhibit of Abenaki baskets. And we consider baskets to be texts for the purposes of this literary collection, I should say. And this museum actually does have staff, but they said, look, we did this traveling exhibit. We really want it to be online, but we don't want to deal with it. We don't want websites. We don't want passwords. Can you please do it? So we figured out a nice workflow, I think, for letting students get some of the experience in uploading and curating these kinds of materials while still making sure that the native basket makers and historians had final say over the way the project was going to look. That's if you NEH, and I have to give a shout out to Mary Downs, who was the program officer I worked with. If you've had one of these grants before, you know that a good program officer is worth her weight in gold or his weight in gold, and Mary Downs really got it. And she really sort of understood the project and really helped us articulate this project to the needs of the grant program. She was just utterly fabulous. So she helped us write this grant for 3 sites, and we proposed 2 things. One would be a big planning meeting where we could bring everybody to the same table and just look at sample sites and talk about what we wanted. And the other one was to set up some small digitization stations at each one of the tribal sites with training. So basic scanner, laptop, software, and digital librarians who would come out there and show tribal youth in particular how to work the stuff. And I think of these 3 sites as representing sort of the range of archiving scenarios that are pretty typical in New England, probably typical in a lot of places. And just one more thing about the New England context, these are communities that really were supposed to have disappeared, right? They really were supposed to have disappeared after King Philip's War of 1776. And in case people don't sort of think of this, prior to the 1980s, they didn't have federal recognition, right? They didn't have, therefore, access to federal resources. So these are really, really under-resourced communities and institutions. So the Tamaquag Museum in Rhode Island, this is our digital librarian, Meredith, on the left, showing Emily, a tribal youth member, and Rebecca, a tribal collaborator, actually, to do some digitization. And the Tamaquag Museum is probably the most, you can see behind those nice those nice lateral files behind, they're sort of the most far along curatorially of all the museums. But I will tell you that when Meredith got there, she kind of looked at the files and said, what do you mean the files are not numbered? What do you mean they didn't have a numbering system. They don't have finding aids. They haven't had the resources for that. It's just in ACID-free folders, and that's the best they could do. So the Tamaquag Museum has now digitized over 1,300 items from these files. They're sort of methodically making their way through their Princess Red Wing papers, who was their founder. And they've also been able to use the NEH grant to leverage other funding, which is one real boon of a grant like this. They've been able to go to other funders in the region to give them more money to continue the project. The other one is Donald Soktoma, who, the guy who got the award at lunch yesterday, and he's in the Passamaquoddy Historic Preservation Office. So Donald basically became TIPO in like 2002 and opened an office and said, I want to start a museum. And so everybody started showing up with, here's my grandmother's papers, here's this box of this, and just sort of dumping them on Donald. So the stuff at Donald's museum is inventoried, if at all, in Donald's head. That's a different sort of state. So Donald has also he's really valuing this grant as an excuse for him to start digging in there and thinking about ways to organize it and thinking about ways to look with Passamaquoddy tribal youth at what they've got and what might be valuable to share. And one of the things he has come up with are these incredible tribal newsletters. There's poetry in there, there's pictures, there's fiction, there's political petitions, there's all kinds of good stuff in these tribal newsletters. And so that's something. The Zibayik Bulletin from coastal Maine is one thing that he's been digitizing. And the last site we haven't started working with yet, we're going to start next month. They're calling themselves the Indigenous Resources Collaborative, and they are 4 women getting quite along in years, 2 Wampanoag elders and historians, and then 2 non-Native women who worked very closely with them throughout the 70s and 80s at the Boston Children's Museum and at Plymouth Plantation, when that was sort of the heyday of Native involvement in cultural heritage institutions in that area. And so this is Granny's garage, right? Like this is, just boxes upon boxes of writings by Native people, slides, photographs, documenting this is the period during which the Wampanoags were coming up for federal recognition, a very famous and prolonged federal recognition case. So it's documenting the culture of that period through newsletters, through other Native writings that have not been available anywhere else. And they're very interested in getting in there and digitizing some of this stuff, especially as we gear up in Massachusetts for the celebration of the Mayflower, 400th anniversary of the Mayflower. I'm putting celebration in quotes because of what Gerald Baker just said. So the grant has been a boon, like most grants are a boon, but it's for a bunch of reasons. These are the things that it let us do, but it also, I will say, it let the lion's share of the funding of that $39,000 go to the tribal institutions and not University of New Hampshire. So University of New Hampshire is officially the entity that's brokering this grant, but they don't have a dog in this fight. In fact, they don't care that I'm doing this at all, right? Like I'm just brokering this. And I think that's a sort of interesting thing that NEH was willing to do, because my impression of a lot of federal grants is that they tend to at least play out along what I would call a relatively colonial model, right, where a big institution like, say, Yale gets a Mondo grant and then shares it, right, with tribal consultants, as opposed to giving the money outright to the tribal consultants and letting them share it with Yale. So we were at least able to negotiate the budget that way. We were able to bring in people like Jane Anderson and James Francis, who have been around here to talk about intellectual property rights and how to handle those and what to be aware of. It allowed us to set up an editorial board and start drafting some takedown policies and MOUs. And it let us start strategizing, perhaps most importantly, for the next grant. So the next grant that we would really like to start pursuing would be a region-wide database of tribal newsletters, because there are tons of them, and they're relatively they're completely inaccessible right now. So that was that side, and then I guess the continuing questions that we have out of these, like in addition to all the questions that you have heard throughout this conference, right, about cultural protocols and copyrights. One thing that I think about and worry about a lot is the long-term sustainability of digital collaborative projects like this. There's been a sort of profusion of these really nice tools like Mookadoo, right, that are meant to spur communities to work together and put all their stuff online. And my impression of a lot of these tools is that the actual community uptake of them has been relatively slow, right? That the most successful projects, like the Plateau People's web portal, tend to be still based in universities. They tend to have university professors worrying about them and shepherding them along. The idea of like a mobile app that you just kind of throw out to the community and have them all curating their own stuff hasn't quite taken off, except here, right? I mean, and so there's an electronic poet named Nick Montfort who teaches at MIT, and he went on a rant recently that's been getting a lot of play because he's a poet and he does really nice rants. But his rant is that Facebook has pushed out all kinds of other interesting digital platforms, right? Like nobody wants to blog anymore because it's too deep, right? They all want to go on Facebook. However, a lot of people who replied to the Nick Montfort rant said, there's some really interesting things going on Facebook, and this is a page from Donald Soctoma's Passamaquoddy Museum page, and it's only a snippet because I couldn't really get a good screenshot, but he's doing this now that he's digitizing all this stuff. He'll find historic photographs and he immediately scans them up on Facebook, and he gets tons of community input, right? Like people get on there and say, that was my great auntie, and that was, hey, I remember that building, I remember this, I remember what happened there in 1950. That's really valuable historic curatorial information, and it's not being saved, right? I mean, Facebook is not searchable. You can't get to it again. And I have heard some cultural heritage professionals even posit that, we may already have passed the time when, tools like Mookadoo are really going to be doing the big digital cultural heritage work. This might be where it's going on. I'm not sure what I think of that thesis yet. It's kind of disturbing, but not entirely disturbing either, because there's a real vibrant cultural conversation going on here. So I'm happy to, that's just a little overview of the project and what we were able to do, or I can take a question now, sure.
I absolutely agree with you that you get a lot of cultural information that lasts about a day.
Yes. And some of it's wrong, let's face it. Some of it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even that information is better than absolutely nothing.
Yes.
It's not your aunt, it's my aunt.
Right.
But
You get the,
the agreement or disagreement.
yeah.
But it's gone after a day or two. And that's the thing that scares me the most, is that we now have a throwaway history that nobody captures.
We can capture it with the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive.
Amen for the Wayback Machine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We're able through that archive and service to archive Facebook.
Yeah. Great.
If people want to set up agreements, right?
Yeah.
Right. One thing our digital librarians have been encouraging Donald to do is just sort of, when this happens and when he gets a really robust conversation, is print it up and put it in the file with the photograph. Still not searchable in a digital sense, but like at least somewhat captured.
You could also just screenshot it and label it
Yep.
that way.
Yep. Not readily searchable, so, but yeah. All right, I'll give it back to Jesse.
Well, we did ask people to bring questions and stories to share, so we can take some time for that now if people have other comments or questions for any of us.
Thank you. I'm the librarian at Southern College.
Fantastic.
So thank you. It's been a really fun adventure. I'd like to throw to the crowd that you don't have to be an academic. I saw the funding rate. I want to be here. I saw for the 25% funding rate. It's like, 1 out of 4 are going to get funded to apply. Worst case scenario. Well, it turned out worst case scenario was I got the funding. Oh my gosh. Being a project manager means you run around with your hair on fire and keep people from microwaving whales. But, that's a true story.
Wow.
There's a bit of truth in that statement.
There's so much truth. That's the only conflict. So we got funded in January, and the only major obstacle was please hope I only work microwave. So it's been really smooth. But like we were saying, it was the
Yeah, and really, you don't have to be a faculty member for our grants. Absolutely not.
So, if I could answer questions or help, I'd love
That's
to.
great.
It's been
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we really do encourage people to collaborate too, whether that be coming from a library setting or a public library or a tribal library and working with the university or however that might work. The foundations level grant that Siobhan was talking about, that's actually one of the central aspects of the grant, is to put together a team that's going to be collaboratively working, and precisely because I think of what you're talking about, which is you're going to bring in particular expertise, but maybe you'll need something else. So whether that be a technical expertise or a subject expertise like Siobhan brought to that project. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Can I ask a weird follow-up question?
Sure.
Who got the indirect costs for your project? Because that's where I'm running into obstacles with continued funding, with partnerships. Because universities want 50%.
They do, and because this grant was so small, it amounted to chump change for our university. The university was graciously willing to waive the indirect costs in this case. But for a bigger grant, I anticipate that'll be an issue.
Yeah, and then when you get into
Yeah.
different organizations and
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned working with Mary Downs,
Yes.
and so how did you reach out and make that connection?
All right, so there was one day a couple of years before I applied where I was in DC and I thought, I'm just going to walk over there. I didn't just walk over there, I actually emailed them in advance and said, I'm going to be in the neighborhood, would it be okay if I stop by? And I actually set up appointments with several program officers in several offices. And Mary was very insightful, and so I think it was about a year later, again, contacting program officers by email, where Mary was sort of the most responsive. And then I finally just got on the phone with her and started talking. So I don't know how you guys feel about people walking in off the street or
We're good with it, yeah. Yeah. I will say, if you see a grant program listed on our website that looks like it might be a fit for what you want to do, there's always an informational email address, and you can email that address, and they will put you in touch with a program officer. I'll also say we're a very small federal agency. If you call us, we pick up the phone. You don't get a phone tree or an automated something. So I think if you take nothing else away from this session, we want to talk to you, and please call us or email us or something. But yeah, the grant pages will have an email address and a phone number that usually goes to a program analyst who can then send your inquiry to the person who would be the best fit.
I like to say we tried to put a human face on the federal agency part. And we do really try to help when we can. And another great opportunity, I think, that ATALM offers is a chance to network with some of us. And I know that Mary is here at the conference. She's actually at another session right now, but she's been coming, and other program officers from NEH have been coming to ATALM as long as it's been going for the last few years as ATALM. And so that's a really great thing that you can get out of a conference like this too. In fact, Julia and Mary and I will all be downstairs in the banquet hall at an NEH table after this. So if you do want to come and stop by and talk with us, we would be happy to. And I'd also mention, I'll just put a plug for some of the regional field services. And Colin Turner is in the Midwest, and there's also NEDCC and Elisa from the Midwest. Oh. And the Northeast Document Conservation Center is also here. A lot of those regional field services will be able to provide some insight on federal preservation grants specifically, and so if they are really great people to reach out to as well, whether that be through giving workshops or just providing advice on preparing applications, or putting you in touch with someone who could be a consultant on something like a PAG grant, or in theory something even like a larger project.
Do the NEH
What we do ask people to do is to justify why they've made choices if, say, you're doing a large digitization project where you would be, creating files or maybe working with some kind of legacy materials in digital format, whatever that might be. We don't have a requirement, but we do ask that you explain why a project would have made the choices that it has, and usually that takes the form of referencing some sort of standards that are out there. For those of you who have worked with digitization projects, the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative has put out a lot of advice, and the Library of Congress also puts out advice on file formats. Those are not what we require, however. You can choose what's best for your institution and the level of project that you're working with. So, for example, you mentioned you're with Internet Archive, so, if someone is working with Internet Archive and they want to make access copies available there, obviously you would want to use file types that are compatible or best for you. So we don't have, I guess I would say we have a humanistic approach to that, which is a pragmatic one. Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that, because when I got into this field of overseeing the Culture and Heritage Language Program, I didn't realize there was so much to know, and I inherited archives of film strips and reel-to-reel recordings and VHS tapes and audio cassette tapes and documents and books, and I was like, where do I start with all this? So, I appreciate that you guys look at us as human beings too.
Are you at a ATALM right now, or are you working with just your own local collection?
Actually, it's not uncommon for tribes to have pockets of these things, and I'm at ATALM, and but we are working at trying to digitize our materials right now. But what's another added is that we're going to move to another location, which means we have to rehouse and get a room fitted for our materials.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we've sometimes been able to do, I don't know if you do this in education, but particularly with preservation projects, in some cases we can put you in touch with people who have done similar projects, say in the past, if you contact us prior to doing an application. So I think that can serve a couple of purposes. One is just to get sort of an idea of what's involved, like you're saying, but also that person can kind of share some of the experiences of going through the application process, which is not a simple thing, as Siobhan mentioned. And it can be kind of intimidating. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that it is a challenge if you're not at a sort of nonprofit or other kind of recognizable organizational entity, because for the preservation and access grants that NEH offers, they have to go to an institution. An individual can't apply, which is why I asked. So that's a challenge for many smaller organizations which may not be, say, incorporated or have a 501c3 status or something like that. I'll just point out one other thing. Our website is NEH.gov. You can find out a lot of information about NEH, including all of our current grant programs. But I think that one of the things, if you're in the state of a project where you're just thinking about exploring funding, one thing you can do is look up previous projects. And so if you scroll down past the sort of rotator and all of the fancy pictures and everything, you can click this funded projects, look up projects NEH has funded link. And so you can basically do a keyword search. So I think if you wanted to, I'm not sure, I haven't tried this in advance, which is never a good idea for for doing a live demonstration. But if you're doing a rehousing project, say, you might be able to find other projects that have listed that. the other thing is just to talk to, call the Division of Preservation and Access and say, this is what I want to do, and they will be able to direct you, like Julia said. Here, a few things did come up, and I know that this first one that came up was a preservation assistance grant. So you can kind of go through that and see the types of institutions that have applied, the sorts of things that they have done. There's usually 1 or 2 paragraphs about each of the grants here.
NEH also makes available successful sample applications, which is unbelievably helpful. And for me, that was a very important part of the process. I spent a long time reading those really carefully because there's a lingo, and you got to know the lingo.
Our website, this is a program page for sustaining cultural heritage collections, and once you find this page, and I gave links to some of those pages in my slides, which will be available later through the Sustainable Heritage Network, you'll find on the right-hand side is where all of the kind of actual important stuff is, including the guidelines which tell you what the program is and what it's about, a budget template, other resources, and then scrolling down are these sample application narratives, which is what Siobhan mentioned. And those are really helpful for kind of seeing, what did a successful application look like? How did they put that argument forward? So those are really helpful to look at. Real pleasure.